Welcome everybody to our GEM 2020-21 Women's Entrepreneurship Report webinar, Thriving Through Crisis, as we have called the report. I wonder, Oria, whether you could put up the first slide, just so that I can talk a little bit to our audience here. So we're going to have a panel discussion today. My name is Aileen Ionescu-Summers. I am the Executive Director of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And I just want to do a few housekeeping announcements before we start, which is that it would be great if you could share your reactions about this webinar and the report more generally on social media using the hashtag up there. You can see it, hashtag GEM Women's Report 21. And you'll see that you will have the opportunity also to make comments in the chat. And our panelists today, well, I'm going to introduce them in a moment, and they'll be delighted to answer the questions, or we also will have an opportunity at the end of the webinar to have a Q&A session. Could I ask you, Oria, just to switch out of this slide so that everybody can see what's going on, the people here today. Let me just introduce what Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is first. So we pride ourselves on being the world's foremost study of entrepreneurship. We carry out survey-based research on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship ecosystems, business contexts around the world. We're a network consortium of over 50 national country teams, primarily associated with top academic institutions. We are the only global research source that collects data on entrepreneurship directly from individual entrepreneurs. And that's what we would call our point of differentiation. So it actually gives us a rather privileged position of being the steward of unique survey tools and data that benefit numerous stakeholder groups, such as women entrepreneurs and the content of the webinar today. We have nearly 23 years of data at this stage, which any academics out there will realize that this allows longitudinal analysis in and across geographies on multiple levels. We carry out over 150,000 interviews annually with experts in adult populations, including entrepreneurs of all ages. At this stage, GEM has data from 117 economies on all continents across the world. And anyone out there thinking of collaborating with GEM, well, it's well worth it, because it's an opportunity to collaborate with over 500 specialists in entrepreneurship research. And we have the involvement of over 300 academics and research institutions. And we've had support over time from over 200 funding institutions. So I think that kind of amounts to quite a lot of clout of GEM overall in today's entrepreneurship research world. But let's see if you agree at the end of this webinar. I hope so. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. And so, Aria, if you would not mind putting up the slide with our panelists. The first is Wingee Sampaio, who is the Global Program Director of the Cartier Women's Initiative. And if you have seen the cover of the report, you'll have noticed that Cartier Women's Initiative is one of our strategic sponsors. Wendy Teleki, who is the head of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, is part of the World Bank Group. And she is the head of the WeFi, as it is called, Secretariat. We also invited along today an entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, Funkola Odeleye, who is a founder of a business called DIYLaw. You'll hear more about that from her in a moment. And she is also a Cartier Women's Initiative Fellow. which means that she collaborates very closely with the Cartier Women's Initiative, and you will also hear more about that later. We also have Amanda Elam, who is the main writer of the Women's Entrepreneurship Report, and Amanda works with Babson College, which is also a global sponsor and founding organization of GEM. So if you could kindly take down that slide, Aurea, because I would like to just ask first Amanda and then Wingee and Wendy about, Amanda, what is the role of Babson College in this women's entrepreneurship work? Maybe you can give us an idea of why this report is of importance to Babson. Thank you.
So at Babson College, we established one of the first centers for women's entrepreneurial leadership in the world. And so we've been focused on women's entrepreneurship research for well over 20 years. And last year, 2020, we actually created a permanent home for an international research consortium called the Diana Project. So I am now a research fellow at the Diana International Research Center. And we've been producing, our Diana researchers have been producing this GEM Women's Report right from the beginning. It provides the trend data that really, I think, guides a lot of the conversation around women's entrepreneurship globally. We know that women are more represented in the informal economy, and that was never measured before GEM. And so this has been, the GEM program has been transformative really for the study of women's entrepreneurship around the world. And that's our commitment to it.
That's great to hear, and it's a really heavy commitment. There's a lot of work going on there in Babson around the report, especially in the last few weeks. And thank you, Amanda. Wingee, can you maybe tell us a little bit about your organization and what the strategic purpose of your sponsorship partnership of GEM is?
Sure. So thank you so much, Eileen, and thank you for having us on this call. The Cartier Women Initiative is an international entrepreneurship program that supports women impact entrepreneurs. And we are very interested in the GEM's Women's Report, specifically because exactly of what Amanda mentioned, we find that this data and these trend analysis is going to be very important and informative for us in how we guide our own work in our program design, but also how we find collaborations with others to create the most impact with the work that we want to do in terms of supporting women impact entrepreneurs. So thank you so much, Amanda, Babson, and all the other sponsors and all the GEM researcher for all your hard work. It's really incredible.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And Wendy, can I ask you more or less the same question? The strategic interest that you might have in the partnership with GEM, but also what is WeFi first?
Thank you, and let me echo Wingee's gratitude for the really amazing work that you and your teams have done to put together this report, which I think is amazing. Just for those of you who don't know WeFi, WeFi is a multi-donor program that's housed at the World Bank to provide support for women entrepreneurs in developing countries. And we work through all of the regional multilateral development banks, plus the World Bank and IFC. And in the last few years, since we were started in 2017 and got our funding out in 2018, we're operational now in 50 countries, working with about 140 partners around the world, including banks, funds, accelerators, training institutions, corporations, who are all trying to figure out how to do more to support women entrepreneurs. So we have a lot happening. And coming from the World Bank, where WeFi sits, the evidence is really important and the data is really important in terms of what are the gaps that we're trying to solve for women entrepreneurs. And right now, especially important is to understand what the trends are with COVID, because the whole world turned upside down. We know the impacts have been very severe, and we want to really understand what that means and use that in our programs, use that data and the evidence that we're seeing of impacts to really adjust and to think about how we can do better with the programs that we're running. So a partnership with GEM was really very strategic for us and very timely considering the global environment right now.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I may turn to you, Funkola, who is the entrepreneur amongst us. So you have your own expanding business. Can you quickly summarize what your business does and put us in the picture, if you can, of the challenges for you this year, especially during the pandemic, as an example of what women entrepreneurs have typically gone through? So I'm kind of asking you for, I call it a report from the trenches, meaning what were your greatest frustrations and sticking points, and how do you feel policymakers reacted to this year's rather exceptional circumstances? And indeed, if there were some positive offshoots, maybe you can talk very briefly about those also.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Funkola Odeleye, and I'm co-founder of DIYLaw. DIYLaw is a legal technology startup that provides accessible legal services to entrepreneurs, starting from business registration to automated legal documents. I'm proud to be here sitting as a Cartier Women's Initiative Fellow 2020. And indeed, what a year that was. It was really challenging, and I'll say one of the major things, and I think was highlighted by this report, was just new problems that we'd never seen. So women, we typically have to prove ourselves 2 times, as more than men have to. And then this was compounded with the challenge of, I will say, online schooling for most of us, especially if you have children. I have a 5-year-old, and online schooling was new to a lot of us at the time, and you have to show up for business, but then there's hours for school. You have people who want to have calls with you, and then you start to think, okay, well, it's a global pandemic. Everyone needs to understand that this is what we're all going through. Do I put my foot forward and say, childcare issues, I'm raising my daughter and I have to put her through school? Or do I sort of try to look, put a tough face on and, juggle the balls and make the meetings because I'm expected to? But I think it got to a point where people started becoming more understanding, and I'll say maybe even like the male stakeholders were also chipping in the family. And so they understood that these problems were not peculiar to women. But before getting to that point of admitting that it wasn't a problem peculiar to women, as a woman, you second guess yourself. Would I be perceived as too weak or too involved in other things, or just not able to hold a business because I had a home front to hold? So that was one major challenge. We were also on the cusp of scaling at the time, and it was going to involve a lot of traveling. And then, of course, there were travel restrictions. So it was, how much can we do with technology? Is this a good time? Is our business going to make it? Because we really had just channeled all our energy towards scaling, and then everything had to stop. So that was where we were looking to for, say, additional revenue or new revenue lines. And it was, are we going to exist after this? But thankfully, there were lifelines. Thankfully, I think there were also initiatives, like you've mentioned, by the governments of different countries. I'm from Nigeria. My business is based in Nigeria, and it was the year when the Finance Act was established. And so if you were under a certain threshold, you weren't going to pay corporation taxes. So that was a relief in itself. I think it was also a wake-up call for a lot of governments, because we saw many startup bills and startup initiatives, and Nigeria has done that. We saw bailouts in countries like the UK and stimulus packages in countries like the US for small business owners and women funds. There were just, things sort of like cropping up to prop up women and encourage them. So I will say it was a blessing and a curse, and I'm just happy that we've all come out a little stronger from it.
Well, that's a really positive note to end that short summary on Funkola. I'm glad to hear that. I think that this gives a really good idea of certain challenges for women entrepreneurs during this last year of the pandemic, with all the disruption that Funkola has referred to. And parts of, I always think it's good to have a story like that in here, because parts of Funkola's story can be echoed by millions of women entrepreneurs out there across the globe that are experiencing similar challenges, but also additional or other challenges that vary depending on industry or national context and many other factors. And that's where research is particularly interesting, because we can actually extract those differentiation factors. GEM research is very comprehensive, and it reveals a great deal about the status of women entrepreneurs on multiple levels. So I'm now going to hand over to Amanda, and if you could put up the slide deck again, Aria, as the main author of the report, Amanda, to bring us through a selected number of slides. It'll give you really just a taste of what the research reveals. Obviously, with limited time, we can't be exhausted, but Amanda will highlight some of the most compelling aspects of the report. So over to you, Amanda, and just let Aurea know when you want her to change the slide.
Great. So we're just going to go over 4 or 5 slides here to give you a flavor of what the top line numbers say in the report. Next slide, Aria. In terms of global participation in entrepreneurship, I'll start by first clarifying that GEM defines entrepreneurship as new businesses, right? And the process of entrepreneurship is the process of starting a new venture. And this is one of the unique features of the GEM data set, is that we're capturing people who want to start a business, so intentions. We're capturing people who are actually doing some activities in the process of starting a business. We call those nascent entrepreneurs. And then we're actually capturing people who are in the early stages, actually earning revenue, paying wages. And so when we're looking at the role of women in entrepreneurship in this early stage of entrepreneurship, doing activities and starting to earn some sales, about 11% of women in the 43 countries who participated in the survey in 2020 are involved in these earliest stages, and about 14% of men. This is an exciting number, right? When we try to estimate, so how many women around the world are actually in this process of starting and running a business less than 42 months old, it's about 274 million around the world. That's a lot of women participating in these early stages. We also have another 139 million women globally running established businesses. So, you know, it's over 400 million women who are active in the process of starting and growing businesses globally. Next slide. So, Kevin, I'll share the slides with you. He's taking pictures. So globally, women represent about 1 in 3 growth-oriented entrepreneurs worldwide. And I think that this is one of the most important messages in our report this year. And that is that, you know, over 40% of women represent over 40% of high growth-oriented entrepreneurs worldwide. Actually, it's 42% of all entrepreneurs worldwide. That's 30%, so almost 1 in 3 of the high growth expectations, 40% of informal investors, so angel investors out there investing in other businesses. Women are very active in this area. Women are, 1 in 3 of the entrepreneurs in the world offering innovative products and services to their market. There are almost 1 in 3 of the entrepreneurs with high exports involved in internationalization, and 1 in 5 of those entrepreneurs in this less than 42-month phase starting a business already with over 20 employees. So women are creating jobs, they are, driving economic growth, and they are bringing about important social change through the types of businesses that they are launching. And this raises the question of why we aren't doing a better job of supporting them. Aria, next slide. So as a sociologist, when I come at this problem set, it's always really important when you're interpreting trend data to understand that a lot of the patterns that you're observing in those top line numbers are driven largely by structural factors. And why does that matter? The top line numbers reinforce those negative stereotypes we have about women's business leadership. And so when we're analyzing the data and publishing as management scholars, we're often controlling for key factors like industry sector and business size. And those 2 variables alone explain much of the variation we see, the gender gap we see in terms of business outcomes. So I want to encourage everyone to understand that when you're interpreting the top line numbers, that you have to be careful about allowing those numbers to reinforce the stereotypes. The GEM Women's Report for years, of course, we keep coming out and we say women are trailing men on this measure and this measure and this measure. Well, if we do subgroup analysis on this data, and we're actually looking at characterizing businesses and gender participation by business type, we start to see very different stories emerge. And then the other thought I'll leave you with on this whole, culture versus structure, or stereotypes versus, these industry and business characteristic patterns, is that those stereotypes that influence patterns of women's entrepreneurship start long before women start a business. So why are women choosing industry sectors that are more competitive, characterized by small business, and that have lower profit margins? And there we get into some complex questions around culture. Why aren't women involved in holding bank accounts for their household? In developing countries, this is a really important pattern, right? If there's one bank account for a family, guess whose name it's in? And so men build credit ratings long before they need to go after credit, whereas women often, when they come to start a business, they don't have a lot of that preparatory. And so these are the types of gender norms that the international development community needs to be paying attention to. Next slide, Aria. And then COVID impacts. This has been a tremendous, profound year. I'm also a business owner. And it was hard. It was really hard to survive, and it was certainly hard to get back on growth track. And so the GEM data gives us a quick snapshot of what was happening in the middle of 2020. Between April and August, we found that women were much more likely to report a business closure due to the pandemic. And this trend was particularly marked in high-income countries and middle-income countries. When you look at these charts here, that blue line represents parity. So this is the female to male ratio, and that blue line represents gender parity. So in high-income countries, this was particularly problematic. Women were much more likely to report closing a business due to the pandemic. Middle-income countries, even more, 40% more likely. And then in low-income countries, we actually saw that women were less likely. And the reason for that, of course, is something we want to unpack, and we do unpack in the report to some extent. A lot of it has to do with the types of businesses that they're running. In the pandemic, difficulty of starting a business, parity for middle income and low income male and female entrepreneurs. But in high income countries, women were more likely to report that it was difficult to start a business in the pandemic. When it comes to seeing opportunity, on the happy side here, we see for high income countries and middle income countries, they're about at parity in terms of men and women reporting seeing a new opportunity in the pandemic. But in low income countries, they're coming in almost 20% lower, women are, compared to men, and seeing an opportunity. Again, we have to look at what types of businesses, what types of industry sectors are these individuals participating in. Next slide. So in addition to presenting the trend data, digging into the trends in the report, we also make some recommendations again this year. And so 4 recommendations. First, we really need to support growth women entrepreneurs. These women entrepreneurs are more likely to hire other women. It's a little harder in male-dominated sectors where a lot of their supply may only be men applying for jobs, like in tech. But women in these male-dominated sectors really need more support maybe than women in retail and health and education services, where women entrepreneurs are more common, because we're more likely to see these negative stereotypes about women's ability to lead invoked in sectors where they're less represented. And then, of course, we need to encourage women investors and women-focused investment. We've been waiting a long time for the male venture capitalists and the male-dominated investment community in general to take more of an active interest investing in women leaders, but also the types of businesses that they want to start. Femtech is an example of this, where it's really hard for femtech entrepreneurs, male and female, to secure the kind of funding they want from the mostly male venture capital community because they just don't understand the business opportunity. So now women are organizing. We're funding the kind of businesses that we want to see define the world in the way we want the world to look, right? And so we need to really encourage women investors and encourage women-focused investment, whether that's impact investing, or small women angels groups organizing. And then finally, we really need to, the COVID pandemic really taught us, we need to develop better policy that directly supports women business owners. And certainly policies, we saw some gains in certain countries where their policies were developed that support small businesses and those that actually support family care. Those really benefit women. Interestingly, they also benefit men because a lot of women's issues are really family issues, right? And so we need to do a better job at breaking down the barrier that we put up between the personal and the public, right? The whole idea that private life has no influence on business is crazy. And the more we study women's entrepreneurship, the more we understand that that is true for women, certainly, but that is also true for men. And so I will leave that final thought with you there.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was like a sort of bird's eye view of some of the main findings of the report. But as I say, there's a very rich sort of treasure chest in there of findings. So I really encourage everybody out there to go to the report and have a look and find what you might be looking for specifically for yourself. I'd like to just maybe if you could take down the slide deck for the moment, Aurea. I'd like to ask you, Wingee, to start off. Can you let us have your reaction to what you are hearing? And since I know you have already read the report, feel free to tell us what findings of all those that you've read about are most informative for your organization's own strategies and why that is.
Sure. Thank you, Aileen. Yes, I mean, I do find the GEM report finding very illuminating and certainly inform our program designs going forward. The Cartier Women Initiative is focused on supporting women entrepreneurs grow their business. And so this phase of what Amanda was describing in terms of women entrepreneurs, 1 in 3 in growth stage is definitely the stage that we're focused on. And so I think the research finding really helps sort of affirm our segmentation, if you will, of our beneficiaries on where to create the most impact. The other dimension of the report that we really appreciated is, of course, this idea that the sector focused. Just a year ago, we launched our first time ever Science and Technology Pioneer program, specifically targeted women in deep tech. And we learned so much in the first edition in terms of the women entrepreneurs, and it was the program category that had the most demand in terms of application. And also, and so we've been trying to learn about how to grow that program. And so I'm very excited to sort of read about Amanda and the overall GEMS team's finding in this category around a high growth industry and how women can create a greater contribution in those industries. And then last but not least, I think, comments around family care, I have to say resonate so much, in our last edition, in midst of COVID, in running a fellowship with our fellowship class, I could tell you all of us, the women in the program, I had my 10-month-old baby next to me, and 5 of the other entrepreneurs had their kids at the same time in our fellowship calls, and it was definitely mother and their children all attending the Cartier Women Initiative program. And so it really sort of hit me at that point that I think a lot of our work is not just around the conversation about advocating for women entrepreneurship, but also how do we engage more resources around family care. So thank you for all those great findings. It certainly resonated a lot for us, and we hope we can do much more in the next coming edition and years around these issues.
Oh, thank you very much, Wingee. And I can confirm that I also have met your lovely baby in our business call. So it's been really a fun time on Zoom. Wendy, can I ask you the same question, like which results are most informative for WeFi, and also maybe you can point to the results that have either surprised or intrigued you most Like, was there anything unexpected that shed light on specific dilemmas or issues, particularly perhaps in emerging economies? Just like your take on that, please.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Eileen. And absolutely, there were definitely some eye-opening parts of the report. And particularly, as you said, we're really interested in emerging markets. So the differences between men and women in emerging markets, the differences between emerging markets and high-income countries, and also the differences between pre and post-COVID. So lots of different ways of looking at this. And I would say the top line kind of number that really made me think a little bit differently about the magnitude of the problem in our countries. I think we've known that there's a lot of women entrepreneurs out there, and that there's 400, the 400 million number is quite big, and a third of entrepreneurs are women. But, when you put it in terms of the number of women who are entrepreneurs and the number of women who aspire to be entrepreneurs, you really see how significant entrepreneurship is for women in these markets. So in emerging markets, about 17% of women are entrepreneurs versus 9% in high-income countries. 35% aspire in emerging markets to be entrepreneurs versus 14% in high income. So half of women think that entrepreneurship is a path out of poverty and into prosperity in these countries, versus about 25% in high-income countries. So it's really a different development challenge in these markets, just because of the magnitude of the numbers of women who really see this as an important path going forward. So that, for one, was really significant for me. The second is, we've known that women are in different sectors. The sectors that they choose result in lower margins. They have less capital intensivity. They're younger than male entrepreneurs. But we really, I think what we see here is that women have the same aspirations, and they have the same will to grow as men. They aspire to be growth entrepreneurs at the same rates as men, but they're more stymied. So they see, coming out of the crisis, they have fewer opportunities to grow than men in those markets do. And generally, they have they don't have the same aspirations to grow the number of employees as quickly as men do. So we want to see what we can do to move that needle to make more women really able to realize their dreams to growth. And then finally, there's some positive things coming out of this, right? We see LAC has more high growth entrepreneurs. We see Asia has more women entrepreneurs with employees. We see that women entrepreneurs have seen the government response in emerging markets be more effective than men have seen it, which was surprising to me. In high income countries, that was not the case. It was the reverse. So some things that were not intuitive coming out of this as well.
Okay, well, that's fascinating, and it's really great to learn that GEM is contributing something really different to the picture. Actually, Funkola, I'd really be interested in your perspective as an entrepreneur. Did it resonate with you? How did it resonate, what you just heard from Amanda? And what do you think, in particular, policymakers, for example, could take away from these results?
Thanks, Eileen. Absolutely, absolutely. It resonates with me. There are belief systems that I've held, and I don't know if it's because I'll say I come from like a very cultural society, which is Nigeria, but it's nice to see that, some people in the Middle East are going through the same things as well. And, it makes me realize that I'm not the only one who goes through any of these things. And I've also always thought that women are over-mentored and underfunded. And that's pretty much, what my journey has been like. You go to somebody and then you have a term sheet and they're asking, oh, have you joined this network of women? Have you done this? Have you gone to this course? Because they just assume that you can't hold your own as much as a man can. So they feel like you need like constant training. It doesn't matter what my degrees are, it's just, if I'm stepping on this turf, then I've got to, be better trained. And so just seeing the results of the reports and also the recommendations about, having more women-focused investors, and having more people invest in women generally is encouraging. It's sort of alluding to the fact that women are less funded than men are, and I think that we can all agree on that. And I'm hoping that what we can take away from this, especially policymakers, is that gender shouldn't matter. There are a lot of yardsticks that should be neutral, and I would say maybe traction of a business or the idea, or whatever problem that we're trying to solve. These are the kinds of yardsticks that should be used to measure benefits programs, funding for women, and not would you be able to handle $100,000 as a woman? Would you be able to stay in meeting rooms with men? Those kinds of cultural barriers, as well as preconceived biases and notions, should pretty much be done away with. And yeah, it really does resonate with me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Funkola. Wingee, I'm actually going to ask you more or less the same question in terms of policymakers. What, in your view, do these results say to them? What do you think are other factors that need to change in order to promote and empower women entrepreneurs moving forward? And really almost in the short term, because I think as we emerge from this pandemic, entrepreneurship is really part of the solution for economies to strengthen themselves. So what can be immediately done, do you think?
Yes, it's so interesting, this question specifically around policymaker. I actually just returned from the European Venture Philanthropy Association Sea Summit, which is an organization that gets together impact investors and corporates who are focused on foundation impact investing. And in the conference, we learned a lot about what Portugal as a country has done around impact investing for impact entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in the audience listening and being so in awe about all the policy that Portugal has created for impact entrepreneurship. And I was thinking, wow, it'd be so great if someone created this whole path of what they were creating for women impact entrepreneurs. And what they have done is really sort of created a capital runway for impact entrepreneurs across 4 stages of financing. And in addition, also created the collaboration between corporates and government partnership for entrepreneurs. And so this created, of course, commercial opportunities for the entrepreneurs, so that for a social entrepreneur in Portugal that's starting a business, they basically have a really great financing path that they can grow into, as well as immediately collaboration relationship that they could pitch their ideas to, should it have traction. And so I thought it was a really great live example of what effective policy can create. And in a few short years, this program that is occurring in Portugal really has created a lot of collaboration and started a lot of social entrepreneurship momentum and traction. And so it just led me to think a lot about, wow, these great insights from GEM about women entrepreneurship and what policymakers can actually do to take action looking at these insights.
Thank you, Wingee. Very interesting. Do you, Wendy, would you have something to add to that in terms of how policymakers can react productively and positively to these results? And in addition to that, what do you think would be one of the greatest challenges, or what would be the greatest challenges to promote and empower women entrepreneurs moving forward through policy action? Oh, we don't, yes.
Absolutely. So, we do work, since we work with the multilateral development banks, we work with the private sector, with banks and financial institutions, as well as policymakers, with regulators and different government agencies, to make sure that the whole ecosystem is there to support women entrepreneurs. So we're always keen to see what are the policy implications for these kinds of activities. So first, I think, a lot of what we've heard today is on how do we move women into high growth sectors or into higher growth trajectories, and what can we do to accelerate them? I've heard, Funkola, I think that point about being over-mentored and under-financed is really important. So there's a lot that can be done to expand access to finance for women, and that includes from the policy side. Not only making sure the enabling infrastructure is there, like accelerators, venture capital, banks, but that those institutions are also held accountable for making sure that they're providing funding in a balanced way, right? At least tracking what they're doing so that people can see how many women are getting finance from these banks, these accelerators. And once we see that, they can say, are they doing enough? And I think what we've seen when we do track that data, there isn't nearly enough happening, but it's very hard to get at that data. So making sure and holding financial institutions accountable to showing what they're doing with women, I think is very important. And we have been looking at this really interesting effort in the UK called the Investing in Women Code that has really helped the situation in the UK. And we think it could be helpful in other places as well. We also know that women have less access to things like collateral, credit histories, things like that. So also making sure the enabling infrastructure is there, which disproportionately benefits women who might not have the kinds of collateral that men have access to. And then finally, we've mentioned the gender norms and really doing more to promote women in non-traditional sectors, make sure that there's training opportunities, that women are really encouraged to move into some of these sectors that are higher growth, higher potential. And then once they're there, they're supported to do that. And in particular, in the finance industry, right? So making sure that there's more women going into finance, because more women in finance means more women will be financed. And we've seen that in equity, private equity, and venture capital, and on the debt side as well. So those are things that we think are all very important.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm just, before we move to a Q&A with the participants, I think that we have some very interesting questions coming in there for Amanda and for others. But one of the reasons that we called the report Thriving Through Crisis is that in the research is quite, it highlights the resilience of women entrepreneurs despite very difficult circumstances and obstacles in their paths. Now, GEM is making it a strategic objective to produce a women's report of this nature every year. And we're doing that because we feel that women's entrepreneurship is increasingly a major topic of interest to the research community and to policymakers and to many international organizations. And also because we believe that reducing the barriers to women's entrepreneurship will be an increasingly important objective for successful economies, particularly in the post-pandemic world, as I've said. So Wendy, come back to you again. In your view, how can GEM's research, given the nature of it now that you are much more familiar with how GEM works than you were before, how can we make a difference when it comes to promoting such a vision in the future of women's entrepreneurship empowerment?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, as you know, WeFi is really geared towards eliminating barriers and help support enabling infrastructure for women entrepreneurs so that they can narrow the gap with men and also get more to parity with high-income countries. And I mentioned the UK Investing in Women Code before, but that actually came out of something called the Rose Review in the UK, which had a really interesting analytical framework that I think of when I think about the research gaps and the areas we need to look at, which is they took a funnel approach, which said, how many women are interested in becoming entrepreneurs? How many actually become entrepreneurs? How productive are they? And how much can they grow? And compare that to men. And through that funnel, women get progressively a smaller and smaller portion of the entrepreneurial pool. Yeah. So if you look at, the aspirations, the actualization of entrepreneurial, interests, the growth opportunities and the profitability potential, you start to see where the constraints are in that funnel and why women are falling out. So we see a lot of gaps in the research and evidence where the GEM research teams are doing great work and can continue to build on that. First of all, of course, expanding data on low-income countries, because that's where we work, and finding having more robust data is obviously very important to us. But the other thing is really understanding paths to growth and segmentation, right? So we know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are necessity entrepreneurs that are there, doing basic subsistence work. How do you get them to grow? What are the success factors that move women into growth patterns, and how do we really cultivate those patterns? And so having a little bit more of an understanding on segmentation, I think, is really, really important. And then once you see that, really understanding the evidence on what works and what doesn't work, and where are the opportunities going forward. We have our own theory of change, and we're compiling an evidence compendium against that theory of change, and are looking at kind of key research questions. So we're continuing to work on this and look forward to engaging with the GEM community on that.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. That actually is very rich response. I'll definitely take those messages into our discussion groups. Wingee, pretty much the similar question, you know, around your vision for the future and what other factors, in your opinion, will make a difference to the successful promotion of women's entrepreneurship in the future. Obviously, you can maybe emphasize factors that you have perhaps not already mentioned.
Sure. So yeah, our vision for the Cartier Women Initiative is a world in which every woman impact entrepreneur can reach their full potential. And for us, we feel like the success factor for that is a combination of social, human, and financial capital support that can help the woman reach you know, their goals in entrepreneurship. And I think this is also a very you know, ripple effects, right? In terms of the woman impact entrepreneur succeeding will lead to their beneficiary and their communities in thriving. And also what we've seen also amongst many of the Cartier Women Initiative Fellow is that many women are serial impact entrepreneurs. And so, and also eventually become investors in other impact entrepreneurship business. And so I hope that, you know, the future of the women entrepreneurs in terms of promotion of it and growth of it will be via this work.
Well, thank you very much. You know, in the end of the day, all of the work that we're doing, that you're doing also, Wingee and Wendy, is about the entrepreneur. And so I'd like to leave the last word to Funkola to perhaps tell us, you know, as the voice of the woman entrepreneur, any last messages that you'd like to give us?
I'll say that women entrepreneurs can't be ignored and can't be marginalized. We play a huge part in economic recovery, in just in general, we just play a huge part, and that it'll be really useful if we had more people shining a light on women entrepreneurs so that other people know that it's been done before and they can do it, and also more people funding women entrepreneurs. Because the opportunities are endless, and we can compete and pretty much overtake the men.
Well, I like that one, pretty much overtake. Then thank you very much, Funkola. So Aurea, if you don't mind putting up the next slide, just introducing the question session. Thank you. And so here we go. We have a few questions that have come in. We've actually had very many positive remarks, lots of congratulations, and especially to you, Amanda, for having led this work. And I also have to join with everybody in thanking you. We're actually lucky that we have Amanda writing the report this year, because she was also a report author last year with Candy Brush, who is also with Babson College. And we did get a question, Amanda, about, you know, if you were to compare and contrast a little bit with last year's report, what would be the main highlight, let's say, differences in what you've picked up?
So what we did not do in this year's report is a country by country comparison of measures. We share a few of those, but the big caution I'll offer to the audience for comparing indicators, global indicators from year to year for global research programs, is you need to look at the sample and see which countries participated, because the indicators can vary so much by country. And in GEM, we have a different set of countries that participate in most years. As Wendy alluded to, in international research programs, low income and developing countries are the least represented. And I can tell you, we can skew the data pretty heavily by including more or fewer. So the GEM data is skewed towards high income countries. Comparing last year to this year is going to be a future project.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost given the very special circumstances of the pandemic, it's almost a work in itself, right, Amanda? Okay, we have another question, which is I'd love to hear Amanda's thoughts on what the investor and development communities can do to identify and nurture the pipeline of growth-oriented women entrepreneurs in emerging markets and delineating them from the rest of the pack. Also, how can you overcome the disproportionately less funding for women entrepreneurs coming out of accelerator programs?
I think those are great questions, and I actually think there's some good work going on out there around this. I work with an organization called Energia, which is looking at women in clean tech, women entrepreneurs in clean tech, and they've got some good programming in place that are helping women to access funding and scale their businesses. I will note that more generally in impact investing, one of the biggest problems that we have is that the impact investors have a tendency to invest in entrepreneurs from high income countries who are going to low income countries to bring solutions. And that's something we really need to address in terms of infrastructure and programming is we really have to create platforms for the local entrepreneurs to bring their solutions. And this is really important in the context of management. We have this concept of frugal innovation, right? That's really based on the principle that it's hard to take innovations that work in high income countries and transport them into, very different contexts. And often what works there is to work with local entrepreneurs to develop ideas and solutions that work for the local economies and local organizations. I expect Funkola probably has a number of ideas that come to mind when she hears that conundrum that we face. So I would basically say that women-focused investing is going to shift it. I think we have a lot of work to do around impact investing, gender smart impact investing, and I'd love to see more of what we have seen that works really well in developing contexts, and that is women investing in women. So it's the organization, whether it's a village level savings group or it's women investors coming together to promote and invest in the types of businesses they would like to see succeed. I think those are going to be some important solutions.
Okay, well, thank you, Amanda. Can you just flip to the next slide, actually, Aurea, because I want to talk about the fact that some of our participants have commented, and also the panelists, especially Wendy, on the fact that some parts, it's actually quite imbalanced, maybe the sample that we have in GEM, because we have we do not have enough low-income countries, and we do not have enough emerging economies. And this was particularly actually affected during the pandemic period, where obviously the priorities of, we mainly are reliant on government sponsors. So priorities of governments somehow got changed during the period. And I'm just going to, since you are over 100 people out there listening right now, and a further 200 will be maybe listening to the recording because they registered for the event and asked for the recording. So I just, please do, connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Share your thoughts about the Women's Entrepreneurship Report using the hashtag. Help us to kind of outreach. But above all, if there's anyone out there, an academic who may be in an emerging economy, low-income economy, maybe think about joining GEM as a national team. For sure, it's not an easy proposition to gain the funding, but we do have upwards of 50 national teams, and they are fairly, constant in their participation year on year. Why? Because it's extremely valuable for academics and also for policymakers. So once a relationship is established with a sponsoring organization, those sponsoring organizations do tend to stick with GEM because of the value of the research. And then, as you'll have seen, we are also very interested in strategic partnerships. We call them strategic because actually the sectors that we want to influence, the organizations and governments that we wish to have an impact on, they are all being worked with by various different organizations, some of which are represented here today. And obviously, by entering into a strategic sponsorship with GEM, we can together, and I think it's goal 17, through partnerships, goal 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals, we can actually influence, policymakers across the globe, and also make life better for women's entrepreneurs across the world. So I just wanted to really make sure that you understood that you can actually reach out to us and maybe get involved with GEM. But there is another question that I would like to cover, Amanda, which is, I think it was concerning social entrepreneurship and whether women are more involved with social entrepreneurship. I'm trying to find again I'm not succeeding to find the question again. But I wonder, could you make a comment perhaps on social entrepreneurship?
Sure, absolutely. So we find, so when we're, how do I answer this? GEM has actually explored this in the past, right? Yeah. And we look at, we include some questions around the goals for starting a business. Is it a social goal? Is it an economic goal? And is it, or an environmental impact goal? And what we find is that men and women are similar on environmental impact in prioritizing these three goals. Mm-hmm. And that men and women are similar on environmental, but that women tend to prioritize social impact more than they do economic impact or profit. In other words, when we're defining what a social venture is in management studies, it's not a social versus commercial, right? It's social ventures are commercial entities that prioritize social impact over profit making. And women love those types of businesses. They like that business model. And there are lots of men who also like it. And I've published one study with colleagues on this point where we found that in, we called them post-material, but high income economies, men were also more likely to prioritize social impact. But in low income contexts, both men and women prioritized economic impact over social impact, I think for obvious reasons. And so yes, absolutely. Women are drawn to businesses that enrich their communities and deliver a lot of important social impact and quality of life improvements. More so than men.
Yes, thank you very much. That's exactly the question that was asked. Why are we seeing more women in participation in social entrepreneurship in comparison with commercial entrepreneurship? I don't know whether you, Wingee, or Wendy, you would have an extra comment, or Funkola, indeed, whoever would like to.
No, I would just add that women are more likely to employ other women. So whether they have a social impact business or not, they're having disproportionate economic impacts on women's employment as well. So that's something that we think is quite an important element of women's entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
And Wendy, I'll add to that women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship in general is often growth-oriented. Entrepreneurship is often a path to industry leadership, and that's one of the most important aspects of women's entrepreneurship as well. Not only do they employ other women, but they also change the gender composition of industry leadership, and it's a really important reason to support women's entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Any other comment from our panel that any burning issue that you may not have said but would like to? Please feel free. We have 1 or 2 minutes yet left.
Yeah, I guess I would just maybe summarize both for Wendy and also for Amanda, your comments about the impact of women impact entrepreneurship is the type of fellows that we see every day in the Cartier Women Initiative, and we hope to be able to support more women impact entrepreneurship, and we hope more people will join us in this support for these group of incredible people and creating social and environmental change.
Thanks, Wingee. Actually, I'll say that, you know, as a close-off comment, that leave no one behind. It's a core transformative promise of a multi-stakeholder driven United Nations 2030 agenda for sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, which is also a special topic report that GEM will be issuing next year, because this year we always had something to say about the impact of entrepreneurship on the Sustainable Development Goals, but we actually beefed up the questions, you know, increased, inserted additional questions that are related to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we will be producing a special report next year on that. But, you know, as regards women, endemic discrimination, and that includes gender discrimination, is a significant driver of exactly leaving people behind. And this inevitably can lead to individuals, families, and entire communities being marginalized and excluded. And time and again, GEM research has shown, this is what GEM research does. It shines a revealing spotlight on women entrepreneurs, and it produces data that is a testament on the increasing, this year especially, the increasing resourcefulness, creativity, and capabilities of women when it comes to building companies that grow and prosper. And so all those women out there, we hope that this trend absolutely continues. And I'd like to thank our panelists very much, Wingee, Wendy, Funkola, and again, very, very special thanks and congratulations to Amanda for this report. And I'd also like to thank Auriel Manso, who helped us with the session, and a special thanks to Kevin and Selma, who did such an excellent job in the outreach and communications for GEM and working with all these different organizations that work with us. So thank you very, very much for joining us today in your numbers, and we hope to see you again at another GEM webinar soon. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.